Awesome. Perfect. Okay, well, let's get started. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our general election briefing today. My name is Jen Morrow. I'm the audience engagement specialist here at San Jose Spotlight. If you subscribe to our newsletter, you might know me from that. You might know me from the San Jose Times. Brandon is here. Hey, Brandon.
Hi there.
So yeah, we're just getting started here. I will be introducing my talented colleagues here in a moment. But first of all, just really appreciate you all taking the time to join us on your lunch hours. And we're really looking forward to discussing all things election with you and taking some of your questions. So as you all know, this was a very consequential election. Many critical decisions, of course, nationally, statewide, but locally here in Silicon Valley as well. Voters chose who to elect to our region's first open congressional seat in decades. Which candidates should serve on the county board of supervisors in a historic race, which we will get into, and how to reshape local city councils. Our team was all over the races this election season, from really in-depth, deeply reported candidate profiles, as well as following the money. And we're going to pivot to Sakura here in a moment to tell us more about that, and fact-checking campaign ads, among many other things. And then on election night, they delivered in-the-moment results, analysis, and reaction from the candidates at their election night parties. So the folks on this call have a wealth of knowledge about the election, and they can really help us unpack the results and offer some of the context around these races and what's next for Silicon Valley. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the folks on the call today. We have with us Nick Preciado, our editor, um, B. Sakura Canestra, who is our Sunnyvale and Santa Clara reporter, and Brandon Foe, our government and politics reporter. Thank you all for being here. I'd like to start with you, Nick.
Sure.
So you and our co-editor, Maury Milo, oversaw all of our coverage on election night. So I was wondering if you could give us a high-level overview of the races that we were paying attention to and some of the context around them leading up to Election Day.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So we had several, just on election night alone. So we really focused on San Jose in terms of local races. So that's like San Jose District 2, 6, 8, and 10. Those were all the open races. We also covered the Board of Supervisors, Districts 2 and 5. We covered Assembly District 26, and the big one, Jen, which I think you mentioned a little earlier, was Congressional District 16. That's the first open congressional seat in Silicon Valley in decades. Rep. Anna Eshoo was retiring, and it was between former San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo and State Assembly Member Evan Lowe. Liccardo won. Lowe conceded a couple weeks ago. I can go over a couple of these. For 8026, that was the Assembly state race. That went to Patrick Ahrens. He was running against Tara Sri Krishnan, who's on the Board of Education for the county. Patrick Ahrens is actually the district director for 8026, which also happens to be Evan Lowe's district. For Board of Supervisors District 2, that was between Madison Nguyen, a former San Jose council member, as well as Betty Young, who is the chief of staff for current District 2 Supervisor Cindy Chavez. That went to Betty Young. For Board of Supervisors District 5, that was between Mountain View Councilmember Margaret Abe Koga and Sally Lieber, who is really just has a long past in politics. That went to Abe Koga. As far as the San Jose Council races go, for District 2, that was Pam Campos and Joe Lopez. That went to Pam Campos. District 6 was Michael Mulcahy and Olivia Navarro. That went to Mulcahy. For District 8, that was Domingo Candelas and Tam Truong. That went to Candelas. And for District 10, it was between Councilman Arjun Batra as well as George Casey. Casey won that. The interesting thing about Districts 8 and 10 were those seats were actually appointed early in 2023. So incumbents Domingo Candelas and Arjun Batra were appointed by the council to fill in when Matt Mahan moved up to mayor and, from District 10, and then District 8 Councilmember Sylvia Arenas moved to the Board of Supervisors for District 1. So I find it interesting, and I can end here too, Jen, but I find it interesting because Candelas and Batra were both appointed. This was like the first real election that they faced. Candelas won by a pretty big margin, and Batra lost. So George Casey, who is a former planning commissioner for the city, is now going to be the District 10 representative. That's kind of a high overview. I mean, we also covered a lot of races the next day that we couldn't get to. Cupertino, Campbell, We also did Santa Clara, which I think Sakura you might get into a little later. Sunnyvale, as well as a number of local ballot measures.
Thank you. That was really helpful just to have that general overview. And we're going to unpack some of these races more. And just a general reminder, we have a Q&A box at the bottom. So if any of those races in particular are of interest to you and you want to know more, we will be getting into them, but put your questions in the Q&A box. But thank you so much, Nick. I want to start by sending it over to Brandon. One of the biggest races, most talked about races, was the Congressional District 16 race, which Nick briefly mentioned, between Evan Lowe and former mayor of San Jose, Sam Liccardo, who we now know is headed to Washington. Brandon, can you break down why this was such a hot contest and why it got so bitter, and maybe then going into what we can expect from our now Congressman Liccardo?
It can't be understated how unprecedented, historic, and at times downright nasty this race got. First, you had that stunning tie-in march between Liccardo, Evan Lowe, Santa Clara County Supervisor Joe Simidian, which then that tie broke with this mysterious recount that was tied to the Liccardo campaign, even though Liccardo denied any coordination. It knocked Simidian out, kind of bolstered Liccardo's chances, and sent him into, November with Evan Lowe. Both candidates are sort of darlings of local political circles in Silicon Valley, but they differ greatly on issues like Prop 36, the statewide ballot measure, which got approved and ramped up criminal punishment for petty theft. Liccardo supported, Lowe opposed. But the tie in the recount in March, that was one of those moments that put this campaign down a really ferocious path of dueling federal election transparency complaints, accusations of backroom dealing and jockeying for the Democratic Party endorsement, and then, of course, back and forth messaging between both campaigns, largely playing out in the media, guilty as charged here over each other's records. You had Evan blitzing Liccardo's support for San Jose's hallmark pension reform measure that spurred an exodus of cops to the extent the city had to declare a state of emergency, all because Liccardo spent like 2 seconds in a TV ad touting his expansion of San Jose's police force as mayor. In turn, you had Liccardo railing against Lowe for his hefty support from oil and gas companies, powerful police unions opposing law, for Lowe opposing laws such as Senate Bill 1421, which allowed more disclosure of police misconduct records. These candidates were taking an absolute microscope to each other, and largely because there was so much money in this race. You had former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg spending millions in independent spending support for Liccardo. Meanwhile, the California Apartment Association and PG&E poured hundreds of thousands into a PAC supporting Evan Lowe. Now, what can we expect from Liccardo as he builds his congressional team now? It remains to be seen what kind of legislation he'll introduce, but his campaign got strong support from gun control advocacy groups, climate advocacy groups. Over his policy book touts, several outdated gun policies at the federal level that he thinks should be changed, such as federal laws destroying gun purchaser approval records within 24 hours of approval. His campaign, like I said, got support from climate groups. He stated his intention to create a program to provide federally backed low-cost financing to homeowners to harden their homes against climate change, help residents obtain property insurance coverage. He said that Congress needs to take a hard look at Medicaid reimbursements, known as Medi-Cal in California, that have largely cut off Medicaid money to large mental health inpatient facilities in a push away from institutions and toward community treatment. Liccardo believes the government learned its lessons from institutionalization in the 20th century, and now needs to fund these larger facilities. So those are some of the things that are coming to mind for me in terms of what is he going to do next.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I know that you will continue to follow what happens next. So definitely be on the lookout for our reporting as we track some of these campaign promises and how things come into fruition. But thank you, Brandon. And now I want to move to Sakura. We're talking about how money is flowing in these races. That was a big focus of yours, handling our campaign finance trackers, following special interest in these races. You covered Assembly District 26 as well as races in Sunnyvale and Santa Clara, which we will get into, and I know that you will discuss. But maybe you could tell us, starting with Assembly District 26, where you saw these special interest groups, and then going into some of the other players in some of these races that we covered.
Yeah. I do want to say just right off the top that I don't have a lot of hard numbers for these things. every single race had thousands of special interest dollars spent on essentially every candidate. I think there was one candidate whose name in like Santa Clara County, Sally Lieber, didn't have a dime spent on or against her. But otherwise, every candidate kind of down the ballot had a lot of special interests supporting or opposing them. And I will start with Assembly District 26 because the race between Patrick Ahrens and Tara Srikrishnan did get pretty expensive. Last I checked, that was actually the race that PG&E had spent the most on out of every like elected official candidate race on November's ballot. PG&E spent the most to support Patrick Ahrens for the seat. And then a super PAC, super PACs are the kind of the committees or the FEC's bodies that allow these big money support to go towards or against candidates. To be clear, this is not directly donating to the candidate. This is independently spending to support or oppose candidates without actually going towards the candidates' pockets. That being said, there was a committee formed to support Ahrens. PG&E sank money into that one. Another one was formed that had the backing from the California Apartments Association, California Association of Realtors, and a group that is a like separate committee of McDonald's franchise owners. And then on the other end, Srikrishnan got a lot of support from different labor groups, teachers unions, nurses unions, as well as climate activists and like groups that support women in politics. I do kind of want to go back to what Brandon was saying about Congressional District 16, though. By far, that was the most expensive race on the ballot. Both candidates had more than $2 million spent to support them and hundreds of thousands spent opposing them. Brandon already mentioned Michael Bloomberg was a big player. Excuse me. Sam Liccardo had a committee that was formed that was spent the vast majority of money backing him. And the main donor to that was Michael Bloomberg, who sank $2 million into that committee alone by the end of the race. Evan Lowe had 11 total super PACs supporting him, all from various different special interest groups. The two main top supporters were Equality PAC and Equality California Votes. Those generally are aligned with the LGBTQ caucus, I believe, in Sacramento. But other PACs that are notable were the Golden State Leadership Fund, which is the top donor to that is also PG&E. So quite a bit of PG&E money floating around here. Coming closer to home, though, the Santa Clara County Supervisors race, especially in District 2, was one of the more expensive local races. That was between Betty Yoon and Madison Nguyen, and it was very along the lines of labor and business. Labor groups spent, last I checked, more than $600,000 to support Betty, and various business groups, including Silicon Valley BizPac, spent hundreds of thousands to support Nguyen. Notably, some of these groups actually spent more to oppose the candidate that they didn't want rather than to actually support the candidate they may have. A group called A Better Bay Area spent more opposing Betty Yoon than almost, I believe, double what it spent opposing Betty than it did to support Madison. So what opposition spending looks like, that's kind of the attack mailers that you see, or the attack ads that you see. Those are not filed as supporting a certain candidate. Those are filed as opposing. So that you kind of saw that those expenditures reflected in the kinds of advertising you saw in that race. It got quite nasty there too. In District 5, I think that's maybe the broadest coalition of support. You had the South Bay Labor Council as well as the California Apartments Association spending to support Margaret Abacoga. Like I said, not a dime was spent in opposition or in support of Sally Lever. So last time I checked, it was all the money was just in support of Margaret. I wasn't able to finish crunching the numbers for San Jose city races, but when I was looking through the list of folks who'd filed, it's a lot of the same players, a lot of labor organizations, the Silicon Valley BizPac, a couple of other groups that were formed specifically to support certain candidates. But I do want to call out a different city's expenditures. In the city of Santa Clara, as has been happening for the past few election cycles, the 49ers sank millions of dollars into committees to support their favored candidates. I believe it was over 2 million last I checked, but their money had some kind of effect. But it's unclear to see what kind. In districts 1, 4, and 5, the candidates that they were spending to support did in fact win. They supported Albert Gonzalez in District 1, and right now he's in a pretty substantial lead. And then council member Suds Jane in District 5 was running for re-election. He also has quite a staunch margin. And then same in District 4, Councilmember Kevin Park was running for re-election. He also has quite a fair margin. Both of them have fair margins over their challengers. But in District 6, the 49ers had actually been spending to support the candidate George Guerrera. They had not been spending to support incumbent Vice Mayor Anthony Becker. He is also currently on trial for perjury. But right now, the person leading that district is Kelly Cox, who the 49ers actually spent against. And she has been endorsed by the mayor in this kind of very long-standing 49ers versus Mayor Lisa Gilmore feud. So unclear to see if independent expenditures made an effect at all in Santa Clara, but I would be remiss to not call that out because after Congressional District 16, that was the most spent on one of these local races. So a lot of money floating around. Clearly, the national level race was the most expensive. Santa Clara seems to be an outlier, but those are kind of the biggest money players in these races.
Thank you so much, Sakura. And yeah, no, you have done a fantastic job reporting on all of these races, but I think Santa Clara in particular, as you mentioned, so interesting, so much at play here. And Sakura is currently covering that perjury trial. So yeah, and if you want to go back and look at those campaign finance trackers, we have those on our website, and it's really great. Sakura did a great job of like laying out the data in a visual format, so it lays it out there very clearly. But thank you for sharing. Now I would like to shift a bit into San Jose City Council and what the makeup of the council looks like post-election day. But obviously, you know, we have a wild card in here with the arrest and resignation of Omar Torres. And just yesterday, we found out that there will be a special election. Brandon, you were at that meeting, and you've been kind of looking at what the makeup of the council looks like at this point with the labor and pro-business factions. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about that, the state of the council, what the attitude looks like, and what if we're seeing a potential shift of power and what that could mean for the city.
Absolutely. This was something that I was, kind of manically discussing with Sakura in the newsroom for like the past few weeks. I'm going to talk a little bit slower now because I was talking faster earlier because I'm terrible at measuring time and thought I was going to take up all the time for some reason. But yeah, when Omar Torres resigned and then was arrested, that very much put us in a choose your own adventure book for San Jose politics. Labor interests were in a good place with Torres in power, would have continued to be even after election day with the election of Pamela Campos, Michael Mulcahy, George Casey, had Torres not gone down. But, now he's in jail. And the result of who takes his place now could, shape policies around developer incentives, worker safety protections, all these issues that play into the core political debates in San Jose about working people balancing their interests with employer interests and incentivizing investment into downtown, turning it into an economic engine, or revitalizing it as an economic engine. So when Torres went down, the immediate question for me was, which way is the council going to go? Special election or appointment? Special election was historically favored by business interests in 2022. And, also they were supported just on their merits. How much more democratic can you get than asking the voters themselves? Hard to argue with that, right? But appointment proponents, appointments were pushed by the pro-labor folks, who argued special elections have such low voter turnout. They tend to favor the wealthiest candidates. Could those in turn favor the business interests? By now, we know which way it's going. The council voted for a special election on Tuesday, and it wasn't all that close. You had just two officials voting no in favor of the appointment instead. And I think that speaks to the absolute, trial that, or the emotional tribulation that downtown residents have just been going through since COVID, economic slowdowns from COVID, blight, public safety concerns. And Torres was in many ways, the Torres scandal was in many ways the final straw for this area. I think the advocacy you saw from residents yesterday was this message: they've had enough. It's time for the voters to close this dark chapter. And while I was reporting on the debate of whether the council should go with an appointment or an election, some people were saying, well, labor and business, that's such a tired narrative. But lo and behold, yesterday, Chamber of Commerce, San Jose Downtown Association supports a special election. And now, now that we're going there, let's see how tired that narrative is. Let's see who prevails and how much money each side does or doesn't spend to make sure they prevail. So you got a name, and you got a lot of names lining up for the seat already. One of them is a staffer for Mayor Matt Mahan, Matthew Quevedo, who has direct experience working with blight, homelessness in downtown. He helped launch the recall against Torres when Torres was refusing to step down. Does that, if Quevedo wins, does that set up for a more solidified voting bloc or an alliance with Mayor Mahan on certain issues? He's also got Gabby Chavez Lopez of Latina Coalition, who's focused on economically empowering Latina small business owners, equitable development. Omar's premier opponent in the last election, Irene Smith, has reappeared. You've got Anthony Tordillos of the Planning Commission, who's really taken up this deeply personal connection to the race. The Omar Torres scandal has threatened to reignite myths and dangerous generalizations about the LGBTQ community. And as an openly gay city leader, Tordillos, he's told me he wants to push back against that narrative while preserving, the LGBTQ movement's place on the council as a gay elected leader. So lots of possibilities. It's just another page in that choose your own adventure book.
No, it's going to be so fascinating to see it all unfold. And, who knows, maybe we'll see a different turnout with the nature of why the seat is open. And clearly, you saw many folks having strong opinions about it. So thank you, Brandon, for laying that out for us. I'd like to pick on you just one more time, but, Nick and Sakura, you both had hands in this as well, so feel free to jump in. But I want to talk a bit about the Board of Supervisors race. This was a very, very historic race, and obviously we saw Betty Duong triumph over Madison Nguyen in District 2. Margaret Abe Koga beat out Sally Lieber in District 5, which means the Board of Supervisors now has a female supermajority. In addition to that, we've got Betty becoming the first Vietnamese American woman on the council, Margaret becoming the first Japanese American woman on the council, or on the board, sorry, excuse me. But maybe you could tell us a little bit about the significance of this leadership change and representation and what effect it might have on policy.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, as somebody who covers Little Saigon, regardless of whether it was Madison or Betty, it would have been the first Vietnamese American supervisor. But Betty's election comes at such not a fraught moment for Little Saigon, but like in this past year, we've seen kind of the political divide that is, it's been a long-standing narrative that the Vietnamese American community is divided in Little Saigon. I think that more applies to older generations. I think younger generations, they don't care as much about issues about communism, and they just, younger generations didn't experience the war. They were probably born here. They didn't go through that. Whereas the older generations, that's still very much an emotional raw point. And over in the last year, you've seen You've seen courtroom battles, jockeying for control over the Vietnamese Heritage Garden, targeted campaigns against, these very, this very positive, cheerful running club nonprofit, all kind of related to the idea. It's all stemming between personal disputes between different factions of older generations of the community around who is or isn't a communist, who does business overseas in Vietnam. Does that make you a communist? And Betty's it'll be interesting to see how, as Betty steps into this role, whether or not these kind of, renewed political fights will affect her. What's also significant about this leadership change is now these communities have representatives with direct experience on the issues they care about. And that's a very vague way of starting to answer that question. But for Betty Young specifically, I was speaking with her on the phone just moments before this discussion because I wanted to ask her this question myself. What do you see changing for the Vietnamese community as a result of your election to D2? Of course, the priority is to raise the standard for county services. Who wouldn't have a priority like that? But some really specific, and to me, the most interesting thing she brought up was culturally competent services, which is something that she's looking at as she, becomes supervisor. One thing she pointed out was the county's senior nutrition program is seeing great success with culturally competent meal cuisine programs. So you're not just giving people cheese sandwiches or kind of, standardized food offerings, but foods that immigrant communities would actually recognize. Betty was saying, these meal programs, Betty is chief of staff for Cindy Chavez, the current D2 supervisor. So she works for the county. She's worked for the county for a very long time. So she has this kind of institutional knowledge of the place. She was saying these meal programs tend to have a full wait list or are over capacity because they cater very specifically. The county's done a great job in shifting toward that, but Betty was saying now we need to kind of lean in all the way on these culturally competent services. I mean, for the culturally competent ones, they also support, senior socialization and community engagement. What better way for our community, our most vulnerable community members, to interact than over food? That's when you as a county worker can also engage with and inform them about stuff that's going on in the county. That's where you can ask them about the issues that are affecting them, public safety, housing, other things. Betty put it well, when we were talking, when you want to know if the county is doing a good job, if the county is actually serving seniors, for instance, well, you go to where they're getting their meals, you go to a community center where they're getting their services.
Thanks, Brandon. Nick, Sakura, do you have anything to add?
I think something significant about this, you mentioned this at the start, Brandon, this all-female supermajority. I think some of the policy approaches might change. We've done a couple stories on this and talked to the major players, the people who are going to be sitting on this supermajority. Board President Supervisor Susan Ellenberg has told us in the past that when women are in these elected leadership roles, that often there's more of a focus on family, on children, on health and wellness. So I mean, some of that has already been happening. The county has been working on like foster youth programs and addressing these kind of family issues. I think that's only going to continue. We'll probably see that maybe get a little more refined in terms of like offering childcare. We know that there's a lot of like daycare deserts, especially like in East San Jose. Childcare is very expensive, so I wouldn't be surprised if that gets taken up by the county on top of just usual work that they're going to have to do. They're going to be looking at development projects and weighing in on the sheriff and the jail. And yeah, I'm really interested to see how the supermajority addresses that kind of stuff.
Definitely. Thank you.
Another interesting thing is also something I covered recently. The county fairgrounds, this massive public asset, this piece of public land. On election day, supervisors were discussing a proposed term sheet for the earthquakes to basically develop their own soccer complex and public fields. And, at that meeting, you had supervisors going, wait a minute here. This proposal vastly undervalues the property. It's a sweetheart deal. The owner of the Earthquakes, John Fisher, also owner of the Oakland Athletics, there's already not this, great track record of, catering your sports team and using your sports team as an engine of community. So they were really questioning, is this the best use? Is this the best deal we're getting for, something that has the potential to change the county from the standpoint of parks, recreational resources? And much of that conversation was also, we can't settle this right now. A new supervisor, a new board is about to be sworn in, two new board members. So this is also something that the next board is going to have to tackle next year.
Thank you both for sharing. And now I think we have a lot of time here for questions. So we have our first question in the chat, but please keep them coming. So we have a question back to San Jose City Council. My concern as a D3 constituent is that we won't be represented properly during the budget process. What can we do about this?
Yes, so I can take that. And Brandon, I mean, if you want to weigh in too, I know that you covered this yesterday. The council is looking at appointing like an interim leader while all this goes on. I know that they're waiting for and they haven't started the nomination period yet. But once that filing period ends for candidates who want to compete in the special election, they're going to appoint an interim leader. Brandon, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that they did that because they don't want to give an incumbent edge to whoever they pick, right? In case they also would decide to run.
Exactly. They want to a lot of council members voiced desire to hold off on appointing an interim leader until after the filing period closes. Yeah, to your point, Nick, the interim leader is very much, that's the caretaker of the seat as candidates gear up to run in the special election. I imagine, a lot of the crucial discussions that will be between now and then will be presided over by that caretaker council member. But that doesn't mean that that interim appointment will be any less kind of divisive or contentious as the topic of special election versus appointment. I mean, you're basically having both debates anyway now.
Right.
So it depends on who they appoint to that interim caretaker seat. Could that have an impact on any number of city issues they tackle before this new council member is elected? Will that council member be kind of like an inverse reflection of the values that that interim council member had? What does that mean for the policies that were just passed? What does that mean for the policies that have yet to be taken on? Budget will be one of them.
Yeah, I think another kind of tricky point with this whole thing too is the timing of when this election is going to happen, because the way that this special election has to happen is there's essentially going to be a runoff. They're going to do one election with all the candidates who are going to compete, and then it goes to the top two for another election. So kind of like our primary general system that we just went through this year. Again, Brian, please correct me if I'm wrong. I don't have the story in front of me, but I think that the city clerk said that they could do an election as early as April, and the budget process usually happens in June, end of July. So, I mean, I think the timing is really going to be important there too, because if they don't have somebody final instilled in there, it could still be that interim leader who's making decisions in this budget process.
Right. The timeline for this election is not at all set in stone, but the most recent report that we got from the city clerk's office was that if the filing period for special election candidates opened on December 16th, an initial election could happen April 8th and a runoff on June 24th. That probably doesn't set it up well for that newly elected council member to take over the budget. That's probably in the caretaker's hands.
We've got another question about the Board of Supervisors. How will the changes to the board affect the choice to build a jail or invest in mental health, et cetera, to keep people from being jailed?
Yeah, I can start this. And Brandon, I mean, I know you cover the county too, so feel free to step in. I'm not sure how that's going to go, because in a way, the county is trying to do both. They're trying to say that, well, we need to build a new jail, but we also have to invest in mental health. I'm hesitant about that because I just don't know where the money's going to come from. We're seeing across the board government struggling with deficits and trying to deal with the loss of one-time monies that they got with COVID through things like the American Rescue Plan Act and other state funds and things like that. So I really think it's going to come down to money. I think that it would be safe to say that the whole board is really looking at ways to keep people from being incarcerated or other things beyond just having like a three-strike law or just sending people to jail for mental health issues, warehousing in the jail like has happened in the past. But I really think the problem is going to come down to money. Can they do both? I believe that they need to do the jail, or I think that there's like some state funding or federal funding at risk if they don't move forward with that at a certain time.
Yeah, the supervisors, at least the current ones, have been pretty clear about their position to have a jail, that there is a need for it. Whether or not the community agrees, that is a continuing debate. And with the tasers, the supervisors have already approved sort of like a shorter first round implementation, like a pilot program. Basically, rolling out 75 Axon tasers. I believe in the correctional setting only. They're not doing it in the field yet. But yeah, I think it plays into this ongoing debate about, the role of the collision of law enforcement and mental health care, the jails being de facto mental health hospitals. And, you're basically arming, deputies with tasers in a population that is, more vulnerable mentally. So, I'm not sure how the new board will kind of interact with that. I'm not sure that the board will. I'm also not sure if the board will reverse course on the jail.
Yeah, and pivoting to another question about the board and how they're going to handle things. How about housing? We have the situation with the Bill Wilson Center being the bidder on the Sunnyvale shelter. We've got a question in the chat about that. Do you all have insights? Sakura, you're involved in that story as well.
I have a steep amount of insight, but I do want to, I guess, my one thought about that was the supervisor with the most experience with the North County shelter specifically is Joe Simidian. So the sheer fact that he is leaving is gonna leave there's gonna be a lot of institutional knowledge about like that shelter that is gone. And at a time when the county does seem to be wanting to pursue a more diverse like it wants to build up more support structures for unhoused residents and in different ways. I remember a conversation I had with Supervisor Ellenberg about how the best way to like the one of the approaches that they want to explore with stopping homelessness is trying to prevent people from becoming homeless in the first place. So uh, there's going to be a lot of interest in supporting homeless folk, like from the supervisors. I do think it is going to be more of, I think it's going to be a more interesting conversation how they choose to go about it, because I feel like they have different opinions on what solutions might work. And I also do want to note, like, I think I do agree that the way that the supervisors interact with the Office of Supportive Housing in and of itself, that has yet to be seen. That might be something that Brandon or Nick, you might have more insight on.
Yeah, I don't know about this time. I think we'll really just have to see. I mean, we're seeing different approaches to homelessness across the board. Part of it is the shift. There's been a real shift, I think, in the last year or two from focusing on homeless individuals to focusing on homeless families. Because especially in our area, we're seeing as the cost of living goes up, more people are living to paycheck, can't afford rent. Families end up living in their cars or with other people sleeping on their couches, or they end up in like shelters, like the Sunnyvale shelter, which recently was actually converted from serving individuals to serving families. So, I mean, maybe there will be more of a focus on that. I really feel like it's going to depend on everyone collectively working to reduce or end homelessness if they can actually end it. There's a statistic, it's like for every one person or household housed in Santa Clara County, another like 1.2 or 1.7 become homeless. That's a decrease compared to what it used to be. It used to be like for every one housed, two or three people became homeless. So it's definitely lower, but they still got a ways to go. I mean, they're not even at an equal level yet. So I think that they're really still just working on getting people housed. Part of that is also a shift away from the shelter model to things that are more like tiny home villages, temporary housing in shipping containers, as well as very new things, especially in San Jose, safe parking sites for people to live in their vehicles, just have like a safe lot to park, as well as what they're calling, I think they're calling them safe sleeping zones now. They used to be called sanctioned encampments. But essentially, the county and cities can't build this temporary housing fast enough, and they're really pivoting away from building structures and what they would call affordable housing to just letting people set up their tents in certain areas that they feel are permissible. It's still a work in progress, but I mean, maybe with the board makeup that'll change. But I think it's bigger than the county. I think it's really going to be a collective effort on all of these local governments.
I did quickly want to add that I think we're seeing homelessness across multiple demographics rising. Like technically the speed at which families are becoming unhoused is still fast, even though that speed has like decreased. That's the for everyone two stat that you
Yeah.
referenced. But I believe I don't have the numbers in front of me, but last I checked, I'm pretty sure the number like the population that was becoming homeless the fastest was elderly, was like seniors,
Yes.
adults, single adults over the age of 65, often disabled as well. So it's I think the county as a whole is going to have a very big problem with trying to balance how it's addressing these different constituents. And I do agree, like there has been a pivot towards supporting families. And I think a big problem that the county is going to have to face is how does it balance supporting families with single, like elderly adults.
There's also the question of what kind of direct policies are the county is the county going to, kind of approve that stabilize families, that allow them to stay in their homes. In this year, it was a big discussion among county staff about changes to their 1993 tenant protection laws, covering, relocation assistance, eviction protections. And as a result of that, county staff were, at one point proposing to give unincorporated neighborhoods, stronger eviction protections than surrounding cities. The changes would have, voided an eviction notice if the landlord, didn't comply with the law. It would have expanded protections against unreasonable evictions for tenants who lived in their home for any amount of time, even less than a few days. I mean, some of the things that we're talking about went beyond statewide protections laid out in California's landmark 2019 rent control and eviction law, and in some aspects, even beyond policies in San Jose, Sunnyvale, Milpitas, which have since adopted stricter protections in the state as well.
Thank you all. We have a couple questions in the chat about what we're seeing around school closures. That's been a big conversation. We've been covering that. There's a question here. What role do local government policies play in supporting our school districts, funding and long-term stability? Do you all have thoughts on that?
I can answer this one. I've been pitching this story for a while, but basically, I mean, this whole situation with Superintendent Mary Ann Dewan at the County Board of Education, this battle on the Board of Education, they fired her. They've since been, mounting this public messaging campaign, kind of trying to defend their decision to fire her. Meanwhile, minority dissenting board members were questioning the legality of it. You have a similar situation in other school districts stemming from school closures. A lot of superintendents across the county have come under scrutiny, have had their jobs become the subject of ferocious public debate. And, as a result of Dewan's firing, the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors just recently debated, do we want to make the superintendent position at the county level an elected position? Do we want to change the governance structure of the Board of Education because of all these issues we're seeing? They were basically saying we've heard complaints that the Board of Education doesn't listen to parents, yada, yada, yada. One thought of mine is, does that lead to a larger discussion about whether superintendents across the county, whether school districts across the county should make the superintendent an elected position? Does that kind of avoid future situations of scrutiny, of scandal, of controversy that have really embroiled superintendents at the local level? And yeah, I think that might be a debate that we could see, if not in the next year, but in the next few. I mean, the county board of supervisors already wants to discuss. They're having county staff come back to them with a full report on kind of like what this would mean if you were to elect a superintendent, if you were to appoint the board and, remove their status as elected positions and you just appoint them yourselves. At the county level, it's more of a, they're trying to gain more control of the Board of Education. But county-wide, regional for like other school districts, I think it's more of a question of, rethinking the role of your top county educator.
Yeah. Just to jump off of that, I think too, I mean, a way that I think local governments could maybe help these districts that are dealing with like school closures and things like that are addressing cost of living and things like rent control or those kind of stabilizing things that would keep people around. It's easy to see. You just look at East San Jose. Alum Rock is looking at closing all kinds of schools or consolidating a couple because enrollment is down. Families can't afford to live there. Even on the east side, they're having to move elsewhere, and that contributes to a decline in enrollment. Berryessa School District is going through something similar, and I also believe Franklin McKinley is also looking at closing some schools. So I think that we're really seeing the growth of an issue that has persisted forever is the high cost of living in the area. It's hard for teachers to live there. It's hard for families to live there. So I think in order to address that, like something has to be done about the cost of living. And that's really where I think local governments could step in and help out. What that is, I don't know, but if they were going to help, it would likely be in some kind of rent stabilization issue.
Brandon, we've got a CD16 question for you. Do you think that the televised debate had an effect on the outcome of the election? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I don't know. I don't know if it had any effect. I think what it did was it gave the public kind of their clearest view yet, of just like how contentious the race was, just how bitter it was. I mean, nobody was like interrupting each other or speaking over each other, but each candidate, actually Evan Lowe more so, kept on bringing, each question about his policies back to like an attack on Liccardo. Liccardo was forced to respond. I think it put the bitterness, the the ferocity on display. I don't know if it really swayed people any which way. I think it did help illuminate each candidate's stances on policing, the environment, pretty clearly. You had each pointing out who got support from who. You had each candidate giving their stance on Prop 36. Evan Lowe goes, I refuse to go back to the era of mass incarceration, whereas Sam Liccardo goes, arrest doesn't always lead to incarceration. I think it was illuminating. I don't really think it kind of like decided the election or helped to decide the election.
Thank you. Maybe one more question. We'll see how it goes, but just generally, do you all was anything surprising to you this election?
I think in terms of how close a couple races were, there's one in Cupertino for city council that is the second and third place. I mean, sorry, let me back up. It's an at-large election, which means there's two seats available. All the candidates are running for those two seats. The top two are going to get those seats. It looks like Councilmember Kitty Moore is going to win re-election to her seat, so that's the first one. The second one is really close between, I believe it's R. Ray Wang and Rod Sinks. And last I checked, there's like a 65-70 vote difference between the two in terms of jockeying for that second place. So, I mean, there's roughly 8,000 ballots that haven't been processed yet. I don't know the actual breakdown for how many of those are in Cupertino, but that's a very close race that could flip. Sinks could end up on top in that one. So I think in terms of that kind of stuff, I found that surprising because some of this is like not easy to see who's going to win, but I think the general adage of like who has the most money tends to win elections tends to hold out. So I think you see when the candidate has more money than the other candidate, they're going to win. I think a perfect example of that, Sakura, you brought it up, is Abe Koga and Sally Lieber in District 5. Sally Lieber had very little money. Abe Koga had a lot of backing. She won. Despite Sally Lieber being in politics for a long time and having maybe more name recognition than Abe Koga. So I just find those kind of close races surprising, and stuff with money I feel like is very telling. Something I just want to jump back to as well is we talked about it earlier, like the labor versus business split. For anyone who's unaware of what that is, a lot of council members actually don't like that because they see that as almost pigeonholing in a way, like every issue is between labor and business interests. But historically, labor unions have supported certain candidates, and business interests like the Chamber of Commerce, which used to be the Silicon Valley organization, as well as like the Downtown Association, the BizPac, that split exists. Those big special interests support candidates and oppose others. And I think that really does, at the end of the day, it makes a difference.
Yeah, thanks for that context. Any other thoughts?
I can
Oh,
talk a little bit about surprises, because I actually do think one of my bigger surprises was in Santa Clara. I was actually quite surprised that Albert Gonzalez got, or at least is currently leading in District 1. So the Santa Clara City Council is very, very deeply divided. It is every council meeting feels like it features some kind of bitter fight. And these elections were no different. So in District 1, they are currently represented by council member Kathy Watanabe, and she is terming out. And she, on the council, the split is often those who have been financially supported by the 49ers and those who are allied with Mayor Lisa Gilmore. And for the past few years, Councilmember Watanabe has been Mayor Gilmore's like sole ally. With her terming out, it was really it was interesting to see whether that seat would hold, or whether like one of the other folks running who are not supported by Mayor Gilmore might land it. And the candidates running for it, out of all of them, Harbir Bhatia has quite a bit of experience working across like multiple different communities in the city of Santa Clara. She did run, I believe 4 years ago, also for the same seat and lost. But this time she was running without the support from the 49ers. 4 years ago, she was supported by the 49ers, and this time she once again lost. But the person who had been endorsed by Mayor Gilmore, Satish Chandra, also lost. So I was quite surprised by that. And it was also interesting to see in District 6, Vice Mayor Anthony Becker's currently sitting at last place. Kelly Cox has a pretty wide margin between herself and then the other challenger, George Guerrero, who I mentioned, and Anthony Becker, currently sitting at around, I think, 22-23% approval. Very interesting to see how that city's votes have laid out. I think my third biggest surprise in that city, though, was the bond. The city of Santa Clara has not had a bond on the ballot since the 50s. And for the first time in decades, they put a bond on the ballot because the city is currently trying to tackle $624 million worth in infrastructure deficit. For anyone here who is a swimmer, the International Swim Center has been closed for almost the entire year because it is simply unsafe to swim in. The plaster from the pool is cracking. There's literal rust in like the showers and locker rooms area. A lot of just unsafe conditions that the city needs to find money to deal with. And that's just one of the many infrastructure problems. Multiple fire stations are unable to fit the fire trucks in the garage, or they have cracks in the structure, or they have other problems that just make fire stations unsafe, and that's your emergency response. So there are a lot of different infrastructure fixes that needed to happen in Santa Clara, and a lot of folks in the city were telling me that they were kind of worried about getting this bond passed. I talked to one of the candidates who did win, or is like currently looking like they will win. And told me it took a lot of campaigning. It took a lot of work to get this passed. But right now the bond is sitting around 68, 69% approval. And it needed a super majority. It needed 66.7. So as of right now, it looks like it is safely going to make it over the finish line.
Thanks, Sakura. And we're getting close on the hour, but to close this out, Brandon, did you want to share your thoughts on that question or any final thoughts for us?
Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. All to say, I didn't really have anything to add. I thought Sakura put it really well.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Really great questions. I apologize that we couldn't get to all of them, but yeah, thank you for joining us on your lunch hour. And just for those of you that might not be as familiar with Spotlight, if you're new to our community, welcome, first of all. And to share a little bit about us, we are a nonprofit news outlet. We are a community-supported newsroom. And we are currently in the midst of our end of year fundraiser. It's our biggest fundraiser of the year, News Match, which this is the best time to give if you do not already, because your donations will be matched dollar for dollar through the end of the year, thanks to our local match funders. This push is really important to make sure that we can continue to do this type of journalism, this in-depth coverage. For next year and beyond, and also do more events like this. So if you appreciate having us, we just encourage you to stay connected. If you're able to give, we would very much appreciate that. But be sure to also subscribe to our newsletters, check out our website, check out our app. And if you have any other questions, always feel free to reach out to our team. We love hearing from you all. So thank you again, and thank you to our panelists for joining us, and we will talk to you next time.
Thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.